Alrighty. Alrighty. So we are going to go ahead and get started here. First and foremost, I would like to say hello from La Suprema. I'm at La Suprema right now. For those of you that don't know, we're a co-working and event space in Barrio Viejo in Tucson, Arizona. We just opened our space in May. So we understand the challenges that come with opening a business during the pandemic and how we're all adjusting to the new challenges and our new way of life. Here are some photos from our space. If you ever need to get in touch with us, whether you want to join the newsletter or you have a question for me about co-working or a private office or events, you can reach me at alex@lasupremaworks.com. And we do these La Suprema lunches periodically. It's usually bi-weekly or monthly. And we get to feature folks from Tucson and from outside of Tucson, which is really, really great. And today we have Rachel Cash joining us. She's based out of Detroit, and she is an expert in privacy and data security. So she has her own company called Elroy, and she's going to explain to us how this switch to working remotely, how we can both protect ourselves and our businesses. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel. And just one more thing, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A or in the chat, either way, and we'll save those for the end. We love questions. It's really nice to have a dialogue at the end. So please bring those forward, and we'll make sure those get asked. All right, Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. It's wonderful being with the team, and especially with La Suprema. It's exciting to know what else is going on in different parts of the country and in exciting movements that are going on. So thank you. So again, my name is Rachel Cash. I am a privacy attorney, and I also am the founder and CEO of a company called Elroy. And what we're really focused on is privacy data, both from a consumer perspective and an enterprise perspective. And today I want to talk about the truth about data as in relation to privacy, security, and as we've now more and more of us are transitioning to work from home. So the goal of today is I want to give an overview of privacy and what that means and the impact of privacy in 2020. As we've seen some changes specifically in regulations, as well as changes in how we work with privacy, so data privacy going forward into the future. So it's important to start with what is privacy, and to understand that privacy is a cluster of many distinct yet related topics. Privacy really involves the control and use and disclosure of personal information. So when we think of personal information, I want us to think about social security number, name, address are typically the high level and very highly classified data elements, but there's also elements such as your ad ID or IP address. So when you're on the internet, your IP address is what big data firms use to track what you're doing, and different advertisement organizations use your IP address to make behavioral determinations. So privacy encompasses all those parts, and there's many issues that come to play when we talk about privacy data and the personal information that is continued to expand as our world becomes more and more integrated with the internet. Some of those issues are related to surveillance, which again, going back to behavioral advertisement, our companies now are surveilling how we use our PI, how we work on the internet, where we go and spend time at websites, or even as far as how long you spend time in stores. It directly is related to the marketing strategies and how we campaign and run sales, as well as your online gossip. So this really is working with big data, your metadata element set, and how we interact with the internet. So understanding where your metadata is. So the data elements such as IP address are really speaking to your metadata, your geolocation. And some of the most important parts that seem to get the most interest are your identity theft. So privacy is also very related to identity theft, and typically more access to records. So the more and more data that we're putting on the internet, the more access that hackers or anybody, unauthorized person, may have to your data, which directly leads to data security and cybersecurity, so privacy data and cybersecurity and data protection are all interrelated disciplines. It's important to understand each element, but specifically understand, what does privacy mean to you? So I want to really focus on data privacy and the differences between data privacy and data security. So when we think of data security, most of us work in work from home environments now, or have worked in different enterprises that have large security features. So you've seen education around phishing, IP spoofing, password cracking, and more organizations, or even your small businesses, have protocols in place to change your password every couple months, or understand when an email is coming from a hacker or someone who's just trying to get information. So that's more related to data security and how we can lock down our personal data. Data privacy is more related to the process of gathering and storing, and how we are storing that data. So if we think of it in a more consumable relationship, we think of our houses, and we secure our house and lock our doors and make sure no intruder can get inside our house. So that's data security. But in terms of privacy, privacy is more related to closing your blinds and making sure people aren't looking inside your house and seeing what you're storing and what's going on. So if we look at that relationship, we understand that they work together, but privacy is more about the anatomy of your own autonomy, and how companies and online advertisers have access to your house and can see inside your house, but how do you limit that? So it directly relates to, why does this matter to you? We've seen headlines over the last couple of years about Facebook, for example, and the Cambridge Analytica exposure. So Facebook collects your PI data. It is a social media company, but really it is a marketing company and sells PI to different third-party organizations to make money. So Cambridge Analytica, you may have had your privacy statement with Facebook and agreed to provide data to Facebook, but Facebook didn't explicitly disclose that they're now selling data to Cambridge Analytica. Facebook has changed these practices as data privacy becomes more and more at the forefront, but you have other companies that are still having practices that we really don't know where the data is going and who has access. So who is infringing on your privacy right. So many of our kids now are using TikTok, specifically Generation Z and the millennials. TikTok is a company that has servers in different countries and have different regulations that are operating under where your PI data may be housed. There's different conversation and misinformation about what TikTok may be tracking and how they're tracking their users. But it really is those metadata elements. So where your geolocation is located and how much music you're listening to and what that genre is, and making behavioral decisions and how to run ads. So TikTok is also a marketing company. So there's data being sold. Anything that's free, think that data is being sold if you're on the internet. A big company that we use and think about as well is Google. Everyone uses the search engine, and we think of Google's business model as it's a search engine, but again, a free tool. So there's Google Ads and different other ad agencies that work with Google as ad ID companies. And they're also selling data or doing some kind of data aggregation as part of their business model. These all impact you as it relates to your individual rights. So Elroy, and one of my real focus and our passions around Elroy is that privacy is a right afforded to you under the 4th Amendment of the Constitution. And it really is your right as an individual to be free from unwanted surveillance. So really tied to the right of a person to secure your person, your personal belongings, the right to against unlawful search and seizure. And as we think of it more in terms of a personal right and implying it onto our data, that's the shift in understanding. So currently how we think of data of our right to freedom or privacy, we think of it only as to the right from police invading our privacy or the government not coming into our houses. But this right has really been expanded to not only our cars and our papers, but the PI data that is related to you as a person as the data subject. So privacy forms the basis of our freedoms, and you have the moment to reserve and reflect in intimacy and solitude about your privacy. So we really have to rethink how privacy works in a more connected world and how much data we're giving away for free, because data really has been commodified, so meaning it has some monetary value. To really understand privacy law, and I'll give you very high level explanations for this, but the US Privacy Act went into place into 1974. This was the first real act in the United States that restricted data held by government agencies. The next really big act didn't happen to more than 20 years later with the Hipaa Act, which is really related to health information data, and it's only implied on companies that fit within the scope of the regulation. So your hospitals, your healthcare providers, and different insurance agencies. That means that if you have health data, so it could be your BMI or your blood pressure measurements in your Apple Watch and you're tracking it, that data is not protected under HIPAA because it's not a agency or organization that is implied under HIPAA. So it took 20 years to get healthcare data, which is highly restricted and very sensitive, till about 2018 to really get a new big widespreading privacy law, which is the GDPR, and it applies to EU, so European Union citizens. Because of the wide scope of the GDPR, it also applies to US-owned companies. So most individuals who have businesses, as well as small businesses, updated their privacy statements depending on the website you're doing hosting, as well as the companies that you're doing business with. So any of the big banks that you worked with would have updated their privacy statements based on the GDPR, because most organizations have servers located in either the EU or apply to European Union citizens. And within the last month or so, the data privacy shield that is also encompassed in the GDPR was struck down by a European Union court. So there will be changes in how companies work with the European Union and how data is moving back and forth. But I really want to shift and focus on the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is more focused on US citizens and is going to be the foundation of how privacy laws work within the next couple years, specifically on a national basis. The California Consumer Privacy Act went into effect January 1st of this year, and it gave individual customers the right of private action against enterprises, which has been a huge shift across the board, because previously, regulations in terms of privacy was regulated by either government regulators or different industry regulators. And this act, the California Consumer Privacy Act, allows an individual to sue a company under a private right of action, request deletion of all PI data that the company may be having, request a return of data, which also will give a individual consumer a really good knowledge of where their PI or personal information is within an organization, as well as the ability to opt out of third-party sales, which is really an interesting thought when your third party is typically where companies are making lots of money because they're selling PI data. So I want to dive in, and I've kind of gone through this a little bit, but what the GDPR did and how it applied to EU citizens. EU citizens in any business entity that performed a transaction with them, regardless of location, must obtain consent from a citizen, provide a timely breach, right, and offer the customer the right to data access, the right to be forgotten, so the right to delete any data. The data must be portable, so be able to be transferred to the customer, as well as privacy by design needs to be built into any technology. If you are a business owner who has a customer who could be located in the European Union, or if you're a business owner who offers different currency options in your business, the GDPR would apply to you, and you must be able to satisfy these conditions. So obtain consent from the customer when you go to the website, have some kind of breach notifications. And the EU does have currently been taking more private actions across businesses, specifically in the US, who failed to do this for their customers. For the CCPA mirrors the GDPR very closely. It applies to any person who has a California customer that may be impacted by their business. So again, if you're a company who has California consumers who may buy from your book of business, or if you're a company that's even has a website, this may apply to you. In doing this, you need to be able to provide the customer access to all the personal data that you've collected. They need to be able to opt out of that data being sold or collected. So depending on how you've structured your website, you will need a privacy statement specific to the California Consumer Privacy Act, as well as the ability to either delete the consumer or return any data that you have on them. It also guarantees the person the right to be deleted. And this applies to different levels of companies if you exceed $25 million, or if you deal with personal information of 50,000 or more customers a year. Typically, as best practices, I would suggest that most companies start shoring up our CCPA based on the CCPA requirements, as it will be the golden standard. There are many privacy laws that are in the pipeline in legislation. From Washington State, New York Cyber has been increasing their privacy laws, as well as Colorado. So the California Consumer Privacy Act will be the gold standard at this point, but there is a thought that there will be a national legislation that passed surrounding privacy, and it will also mirror very closely to the CCPA, and it could extend to companies that are doing less than $25 million a year. So as we start to roadmap and prepare for existing legislation and compliance requirements, it's definitely something in a privacy assessment that I would implement within our organizations. So now let's move on to privacy and the work from home structure. Many of us went to a completely work from home or remote framework as of March. In this structure, this has also, so there's millions of workers who've pivoted to remote work, causing new strains on computer networks, federal agencies, as well as your security networks. And many of us have specifically been moving to Zoom. And I know in the last 2 weeks, Zoom has made a huge update to their security system because there have been hackers, specifically in the Zoom's free option pool. But there has been a shift in how we manage cybersecurity and more specifically how we're managing privacy when we're in a work from home scenario. For example, staff now has access to files and servers from different locations, which have caused greater concerns for not only security, but it's coupled with privacy as your customer information is now being broadcasted on your individual networks and personal networks. Some tips that we recommend with the companies that we work with is to be very vigilant, make sure you're not trusting any other Wi-Fi. If you already have a VPN protocol with your work from home, within your work from home environment, make sure that your company is in compliance, specifically the PCI compliance. Or if you do not have a VPN working on your computers, I can, at the end of this call, make some recommendations about some VPNs that will work. Specifically, VPNs are encrypting your IP address and the traffic that's moving from your computer over the internet to any other server that you're connecting to. I would highly recommend that you integrate with a VPN service that is has their privacy and security, meets privacy and security compliance. Watch out for random USBs, some contain malware, and when you're visiting sites and you're using may have been accessing your personal or using your personal computer and accessing company files, hover over your mouse and check on links or any suspicious files. Typically, if someone is a hacker, sorry, I have a lot of stuff going on, the phone's ringing. If someone is a hacker, they would not be as careful with the links that they send. I want to also talk about and touch on, here, wait just a sorry.
We've all been there.
Work from home.
The work from home life, yeah.
I also want to touch on, because we're on more work from home, as we proceed on returning to work or we proceed on returning to the office, there are new regulations coming out concerning COVID-19 and how we're tracking. And many of these regulations, as I've talked about before, specifically HIPAA, so COVID would be health information. But because it's a public health interest, it's raising concerns of the relationship between your individual privacy and the greater good. So there are more and more mobile apps that are helping track COVID-19 to contain the outbreak. These apps have raised multiple concerns about personal privacy. I am very supportive of tracking and making sure we understand where COVID-19 and the hotspots are, but really understanding there's a clear step in how far we can exceed our privacy. So when we give full information to the mobile applications, we have to ensure that we're limiting the information that we're providing to just the scope that we've agreed to. So the scope may be, yes, I have COVID-19, or no, I don't have COVID-19, but not that every information about my personal health is disclosed to the app company and they can be sold. So really, as consumers and people who are using mobile applications, we have to be hyper vigilant during this time, and specifically during times of heightened security or widespread concern, that we ensure that we have a balance between addressing those concerns and maintaining our personal privacy. Some other examples that are coming up are the facial recognition cameras and the different changes they're making as more and more people are wearing masks. The facial recognition cameras have failed because of the masks that people are wearing, which there's a balance. And so there may be an ask for different information, such as your retina. And so really making sure that we have a balance of the relationship of what data we give. Again, going back to work, there is a push for temperature sensors as well as contact tracing applications. When you go into work, the expectation, one, is for your workplace to have a privacy policy updated that speaks to new biometrics that the company may be collecting. Typically, your company, unless they're providing some benefits through your benefits provider, keeps that data completely separate from other PI data that a company may need as part of your employment. Or if you do have employees that you were tracking temperature sensors and you're keeping a record of it, make sure that either the employees or your customers really understand that you're keeping a record of temperatures and have the proper reporting protocol as well as disclosures to your consumers or employees. A pandemic has increased awareness of sharing personal information for willingness to share personal information for social good. Again, very aligned with this, but make sure that when we're doing this, we balance our rights and what is the greater good. And I will go back to an example that's a hard example to think about, but when 9/11 happened, we agreed as Congress agreed to do widespread tracing of different people's phones, and most of the major phone carriers agreed to either listen into phone calls to identify terrorists. Now, while I can't speak to if that helped or not, but I can speak to that it became very pervasive and extended its scope, as now phone companies haven't stopped that and have just stopped doing this as of recent years. So again, we have to continue to balance our privacy rights in any new social situation that's coming up, because it's not, once you give away too much of your constitutional right, it's very hard to come back to it. And so this brings us to the balance of privacy and protection. So I've kind of touched on this. Most of the sweeping investigative powers of the intelligence community happened after the 9/11 attack, and it's still in place nearly 2 decades later. The rights and privacy were surrendered temporarily rights and privacy that's surrendered temporarily during an emergency become very difficult to get back after the emergency has happened. Another example of the balance between protection and privacy that is actually very prevalent right now is the Earn It Act. Specifically, it's focused on the liability of different companies to prevent sexual abuse of kids. In the version, it would create a standard for companies to have to disclose any user-generated content, and it could be judged. But in terms of that, it also takes away a lot of your rights to do end-to-end encryption of what you're doing. So while we're trying to protect a very specific population, the scope could go very far and say you couldn't use a VPN, so you couldn't use the internet to the full extent. So you really are giving away a lot of your privacy rights in the hope to do something really good. And it's constantly this balance of power, this protection and privacy, what's happening in this space right now. So that is all I wanted to talk about and touch on. Do we have any questions or comments?
Thanks so much, Rachel. I know I have some questions to get us started. So my first one is there something as individuals we can start doing today to help protect ourselves?
Yeah, so as individuals, and it may be a tall order, but I think the first task is really to educate yourself and gather awareness. Read your privacy statements before you agree blindly to companies and how they're using your data, even if it's just understanding where your data is and still agreeing to the terms. At least you'll have that awareness. And it also really brings me to Elroy and what we're doing as an organization. So Elroy, I mentioned, is offering a consumer technology solution. Our technology solution will allow end users, such as yourself, Alex, to track every place that you provided PI data and the privacy statements that are related to the entities that you provided your personal data and how you action against those companies. So right now it's relatively hard. You can make requests to Facebook to return your data, and you can make an individual request to Google to return your data, but it's not as consumable. And so in terms of actionable steps, read your privacy statements. And there are existing technologies that are coming up in the space that will help people manage their privacy data in one centralized location. And again, that's what Elroy is building.
That's great. Oh, we have another question. Do you have to be Gdrp compliant if you only accept US currency on an e-commerce site?
You do not, and then also I will add just a caveat, depending on your commerce site, so who's providing your website. So if it's like a Shopify or a Wix, they typically have built-in protocols for GDPR. So if you're self-hosting your site, I would have to look at your data flow, or you would have to have someone look at your data flow and really understand where your PI data and who may be potentially exposed to your website.
Right. Awesome. That's really great. And Rachel, do you work with clients all over? Do you work with clients remotely as well?
I do. So right now I work with quite a few insurance companies as well as smaller businesses in both the security and privacy. We are right now helping companies prepare for returning to work based on COVID. So we're doing it all remotely now.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess my next question is, for small businesses and entrepreneurs, what's the number one thing or like the first like priority that they should think about in regards to privacy and security and data, like right now?
So right now, if I was, as a small business, my first task would to make sure that your websites are secure, SSL certificates, and making sure your websites are encrypted. If you have any payment portals, I'm sure that you're connected with other payment portals. The second really big important thing is to have a privacy statement and a privacy policy in place. So your privacy statement would provide any of your users guidance on what's happening with the data that you collect and how you do deletion. Even if you're not doing, like right now, a full deletion, what is your protocol and who do you share information with? So if you're having an ad and you connect to Google Ads, you would let them know in your privacy statement. If you're not if you're under $25 million, you won't right now be have to comply with the California Privacy Act. But definitely having a privacy policy in place. The second portion of part of that privacy policy would be your security policy, because privacy and security are heavily related. If you have a good data security team, have breach notifications. If you have your own servers or a relationship where you could have breaches of your data, have a policy and who would be your point person and how long it would take you to notify your team.
Okay, that's great. And I know you mentioned that you would share some VPNs you recommend.
Yep, so NordVPN if you are a very small company. And then I also like the Amazon Web Servers VPN, depending on how sophisticated your team works. There's other VPNs out there that are free. I would highly recommend that. So I'll send a list of the VPNs I recommend for different both enterprise solutions, if you have an enterprise and a team of people, and individually, because I have a VPN on all my computers that are good solutions. I, again, stick away from free VPN options unless you're building your own VPN, which is easy to do as well. But if it's a free, basically anything free, they're selling something. Your company has to sell something, and it's your data.
Yeah. Yeah, so we all need to be aware of those free subscriptions and things. That's great. So if you send that over to me, I'll include that in an email out to everyone who's here or the recording. We have another question. Where would I find boilerplate language for data privacy?
So there's lots of wonderful tools out there. So I should have all this listed out for you guys. Yeah, so I have a couple of really good boilerplate, some boilerplate that I would recommend depending on your book of business. But there's also some really good websites that can help you identify what PI you're actually collecting, again, depending on your book of business and how you're using the data. So if it's for payment processing or marketing, your privacy statement typically tells the user all the uses. So I can also provide the templates that I recommend and some websites that can kind of fill in some of those options.
Yep. Excellent. That's super helpful. These resources I know are so helpful for us and for all the small businesses and entrepreneurs out there, because it can be really, really overwhelming. I mean, I'm sure you probably get that a lot, but like where do we even start, right? So it's super helpful to have you as a resource and to have you share. It's been really, really wonderful and eye-opening for me. I'm like, I know I just agree to way too many things before I actually know what I'm signing up for, right?
But we all agree to Apple and like just say yes, 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 and we don't hold, and really as consumers, we have the buying power and it's our right and it's our commodity that we must own and exercise. And so more and more brands are focusing on privacy as by design or as part of their business. So as consumers, we need to demand it and also really understand the value of like our commodity and the data, because we are the data subjects and it belongs to us.
Right. Yeah, that's excellent. I'm definitely going to up my game. That's for sure. And I'm sure so many others will. Well, I think that wraps up. We had a lot of great questions. And this was a really informative presentation, Rachel. I'm just so happy that we were able to host you today. You're one of our first people that we were able to host from outside of like the Arizona area. So it was just like so wonderful to have you. And for everyone that's still on this call, I'm going to send out this recording so you can reference it, go back to it, especially because I'm going to send the new links that Rachel, her recommendations, all of those along with it. So you can refer back to the recording as well, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. So you'll have that as a resource.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone who joined. Thank you, Rachel. This was wonderful. I hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday and just power through the week and crush it. And hopefully we'll be in touch soon with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was so wonderful. We're so lucky to have you. I'm really glad that you and Gina were able to connect. And
that was really nice and good question. So I'll provide you the VPNs and like the templates I use. It's just like, these are just the templates I typically send to people, and like